Chapter 56. Liam was standing in the living room with his shoulder turned to her, looking through a photograph album, and Rain paused in the doorway, her emotions in a turmoil of uncertainty, guilt, relief, and happiness. The shower she'd taken had refreshed her and cleared her head, and when that happened, there was no escaping the truth. She should have told Liam she was pregnant 2 years ago. Everything Liam had done since learning about Ethan proved this. The most touching proof was the tenderness on his face when he looked at his son. She had wronged both Liam and Ethan by keeping them apart. She had no doubt he intended to make her realize that now, and whatever way he chose to do it would be deserved and unpleasant. Trying to ease her guilt, she reminded herself of how deceitful he'd been on the island and how badly he'd treated her the last time she saw him at the banquet. Unfortunately, that was little comfort, and it was no buffer against the jolt of seeing him standing there, looking exactly as she remembered him. Tall, wide-shouldered, immaculately groomed, and wickedly handsome. Every detail about him was as familiar as if she'd seen him yesterday: the shape of his sharp jaw, the curve of his cheek, the sensual mouth, and the long, straight nose. She suddenly realized she was wringing her hands and quickly dropped them to her sides, then stepped forward, prepared to face the outrage he'd obviously been holding back until Ethan was asleep. "I'm sorry I took so long," she said, and then added a lame explanation. "I stayed in the hall outside Ethan's bedroom for a few minutes in case you needed a little help." He put the photograph album down abruptly and turned toward her, his dark brows drawing into a frown. Rain braced herself for an angry outburst. "I don't think I did a good job reading to him," he said. I lost his attention right away. Rain's emotions shifted from anxiety to amusement. "When you read to him next time, try to sound like you believe everything in the book rather than make it obvious how ridiculous it is to have a mouse flying." He nodded, but his gaze shifted to the floor, and he fell silent for a moment as if in deep thought. He then gestured toward the photograph albums on the table and said in a businesslike voice, "I'd like to borrow these." "You don't need to do that. Leave them here, and I'll have a set made for you as well. I have 2 years of my son's life to catch up on. I'd like to start on that tonight." The flat-screen television was on and turned down very low, but it pulled their attention to it because the station was running the news of Will Parker's statement to the press earlier on his way out, and at the end, several reporters were calling out asking him the same question. "Is Liam Thompson Ethan's father?" Parker simply ignored the question and tried to dismiss everyone from the apartment entrance with the other cops. "I want that speculation taken care of tonight," Liam said flatly, his dark eyes shifting to Rain in a cool challenge. "We can confirm it to the media together, or I can do it myself when I leave here tonight. Either way, I want the conjecture about my son's parentage ended immediately," he said. Rain nodded in agreement but then added, "You can confirm it. I mean, you can speak for both of us. You could say something like, 'Rain and I want to thank everyone for their help in finding our son.' That will answer their question and kill their curiosity." It would indeed answer their question without going deep, but Liam was more interested in her reasoning for wanting him to do it alone. "Why don't you want to go out there with me to answer them?" She shrugged. "I don't know," she said half seriously. "I just think you'd be better off confirming it, but if you want me to be there, I'll handle it myself then," he said, but this time Rain was almost certain she saw amusement flicker in his eyes. There was none in his voice, however, when he said, "You and I need to talk. But first, I'm starving because I haven't eaten anything since this morning. What are my chances of getting something to eat in your kitchen?" Liam understood why the media announcement was going to be embarrassing for her and why she was avoiding it. He also realized that her pregnancy was probably what put an end to her hope of marrying Everett. Liam had been furious with her the last time he saw her, but ultimately, she had paid an extremely high price for their time on the island. Instead of blaming his son for the sacrifice she'd had to make, she had obviously lavished him with her love. Whatever bitterness she harbored toward Liam for his role in ruining her life, she hadn't taken it out on his son. In fact, she hadn't taken it out on Liam either. At least not yet. However, the time for a showdown was at hand, as long as it was out of Ethan's earshot. "I have a restaurant across the street," Rain pointed out with a hesitant smile. "Though it's closed for any customers, a few of the staff are still there clearing away the cooked dishes. Tell me what you'd like to eat, and I'll call someone to bring it up here for you." "I'd rather go there and eat. I can't leave Ethan alone," she said quickly. She'd already made the mistake of leaving him in the morning, which had ended in him being kidnapped. She wasn't going to repeat that again. "He won't be alone." In explanation, Liam nodded toward Dante, who immediately got off the stool and walked into the living room. "This is Dante Cheng," Liam explained. "He is a well-trained bodyguard. He will be staying around Ethan 24 hours a day until Milo is caught and put behind bars." Rain's initial reaction was shock at the discovery that there was someone else in the room whom she had completely failed to notice until now. Her heart gave a little thud when she locked eyes with a man introduced to her as Dante, who looked to be a handsome mixed Asian from his appearance. She didn't know whether she would like a total stranger in constant proximity to her son, but the man's welcoming smile and aura made her feel at ease for some reason. When he smiled, his eyes looked smaller than they were, and he had a pretty white smile. "You're a bodyguard?" she asked idiotically, and then cleared her throat when he kept smiling at her without saying anything, like he didn't understand what she said. Smiling, she held out her hand and said sincerely, "I'll feel much better knowing you're with Ethan." "Thank you." Instead of shaking her hand, Dante took it between both of his, grinned at Liam, and said in Mandarin, "Her smile is warm enough to bake bread. She has eyes like green jewels, hair the color of flame, and skin like cream. If you took this woman to bed and then forgot about it like you said, you need to see a doctor about your memory." Rain smiled uncertainly at Liam, hoping for him to translate what Dante said, but he shot the bodyguard a killing look. Then he looked at Rain and said firmly, "You and I have some things to discuss. Let's go to the restaurant." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up his briefcase along with the photo albums. Nervous anxiety set in, and Rain glanced briefly toward Dante, unaware that her emotions were written all over her face. "Will you ask Dante what he'd like to eat so I can have it brought here for him?" Liam opened the door and stepped aside for Rain to lead him. Dante is not hungry. He'd eaten a while ago in the lobby. Behind him, Dante issued a warning to Liam in Mandarin. "Don't forget she's your son's mother, and she is very nervous. She watched you from the living room doorway, wringing her hands earlier. No matter what she has done, do not forget that she is the mother of your son. Go easy on her, or else I'd be forced to take her from." Liam closed the door on the end of Dante's sentence. Chapter 57. As Rain and Liam stepped out of the apartment building through the back entrance, avoiding the front where a few media people still waited, they were greeted by the serene glow of the full moon hanging high in the night sky. A balmy breeze swept their hair back. The street was bathed in the soft illumination of streetlights, casting long shadows and creating a peaceful atmosphere. Despite the late hour, a few sirens wailed in the distance, and the occasional car hummed by, breaking the otherwise quiet atmosphere. Rain walked ahead, her thoughts swirling with anxiety about the impending conversation she was about to have with Liam. She knew whatever he planned to talk about wasn't going to be pleasant because she'd been at fault for not telling him about her pregnancy back then, and she was ready to face the consequences. However, what she wasn't ready to face was their past together. Rain's mind was so preoccupied that she didn't notice the uneven curb in her path. Just as she was about to stumble, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her. "Be careful," Liam whispered, his deep, resounding voice close to her ear, stirring something deep in her heart that had remained inactive for years. The sudden sound of her heart skipping a beat startled her into moving quickly away from his hold. With a warm flush on her cheeks, she cleared her throat. "Thank you," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as she hurried toward the restaurant entrance, trying to shake off the unexpected moment of intimacy with the father of her son, who she'd decided wanted nothing with her but to play his role as their son's father. Liam watched her for a moment, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, before following her into the restaurant. By the time he was inside, she was nowhere in sight. However, he was immediately struck by the restaurant's elegance. And he couldn't help but admire the setting. The entrance opened into a grand lobby with a high ceiling and a stunning chandelier that cast a warm glow over the polished marble floor. To the right, a stylish bar with sleek stools invited patrons for a drink, while to the left, a cozy lounge area with plush armchairs and a grand piano exuded sophistication. He could see a sweeping staircase leading to the upper floors, where large windows allowed the moonlight and the streetlights to flood in, highlighting the tasteful decor of rich wood, soft fabrics, and modern art pieces. The dining area was spacious yet intimate, with well-spaced tables set with fine china and crystal glassware. A soft hum of conversation from the staff could be heard in the background, and he heard Rain's voice speaking to them. Instead of going after her voice to find her, he allowed his legs to take him around as he'd never been to any of the Wallace restaurants, even in the past, and the reason was because he disliked Jason and wanted to avoid Rain as much as possible. But now, he allowed himself to move around. He walked into a polished hallway where on its walls were a display of photographs of all the Wallace descendants who'd owned the restaurants before Rain's father. Then, when he reached Rain's photograph at the last roll, he stopped. Below all the photographs, there were glass golden shelves that held a display of the awards every descendant of the Wallaces had won for the restaurant. And below Rain's photograph, there were a few displayed as well. Based on the awards and a few paper articles, not only had she managed to maintain the restaurant's reputation, she'd also enhanced it. When he came to the last, most recent item, he felt an inappropriate twinge of pride, which he immediately reclassified as mere admiration, that Rain had just been named the country's Restaurateur of the Year. "You're here," came Rain's surprised voice from the hallway, which made him turn his head towards her direction. After her shower earlier at home, she changed into a pair of dark jogger pants and a soft cashmere sweater that was the same green as her eyes, with an open cowl neck that threatened to bare one shoulder. With her long red hair falling in wavy curls around her shoulders and her hips swaying gently as she walked towards him from the beginning of the hallway, she looked feminine, poised, and sexy at the same time. Liam tipped his head toward the article in the glass and said, "I remember when you were terrified you wouldn't be able to keep this place open, but look what you've accomplished. I made a mess of everything the first few months, and I would have given up back then if it hadn't been for Ethan. I needed to make a success of the business for his sake, because I want him to have a good future with nothing to worry about." As she spoke, she led him to the restaurant's elegant lounge area, where only VIPs with reservations got to sit. She switched on the light, and mellow lights illuminated a stylish lounge that immediately impressed Liam enough to make him pause to admire it. The lounge was a haven of luxury and comfort, with plush, deep-seated sofas and armchairs upholstered in rich, velvety fabrics. The walls were adorned with tasteful art pieces, and a soft, ambient glow from the mellow lights added to the sophisticated atmosphere. Small, polished tables were arranged with perfect precision, offering a sense of privacy and exclusivity. The air was filled with a subtle scent of fresh flowers, making the place cozy and inviting. "I've asked a waiter to bring our meals to us in here," she explained, walking toward the bar at the lounge area. Liam suddenly remembered the way she'd looked presiding over a candlelit table in a villa by the sea. Now, as he watched her, he understood why she'd seemed so sure of herself and self-possessed that night. From beneath her lashes, Rain watched him studying the room. This day had begun as the worst of her life, and it was ending as one of the very best, because no matter what he said to her now, it couldn't offset the fact that he was going to be a part of Ethan's life. He took off his jacket and tie, draped them over the back of a bar stool, and loosened the top buttons of his white shirt. The minute he put his jacket over the chair, her mind flashed to the night in the villa on the island when he'd left his jacket over a chair and forgotten it there when he left abruptly. Her stomach knotted at the memory, and painful questions popped into her mind, questions she didn't want to ask, with answers she didn't need to hear and probably wouldn't believe if she did after he'd insulted her at the banquet that night years ago. Obviously, the best thing to do, for both their sakes, was to avoid any discussion, any reminders, and any recriminations about the past. She was prepared to let him vent his anger at her for not telling him about Ethan, but everything else was off limits, at least for the immediate future. Rain resolved to stick to that decision tonight, and to make Liam stick to it. And if that wasn't possible, then she would make light of their past and persuade him to follow suit. Anticipating that his answer to her next question would be yes, Rain stepped behind the bar. "Would you like a drink?" "Yes," Liam said, watching her in the mirror. He liked whiskey or white wine, Rain remembered, and automatically reached for the best bottle on the shelf. Then she jerked her hand down, and in a belated attempt to stick to her own decision not to act like she remembered anything about the past, she glanced over her shoulder at him and politely inquired, "What would you like to have?" His gaze pinned her. "You know the answer to that." Rain turned back to the shelves of liquor. "Apparently, you still prefer whiskey," she concluded wryly. "And you're still very beautiful." Rain's hand froze on the whiskey bottle. Then she took it carefully down and reached for a glass. "I wasn't aware that you thought I was beautiful before." "The hell you weren't." Rain knew she wasn't beautiful. At best, her coloring might qualify her looks as striking. And except for an indirect reference to her legs the night they went to the casino, Liam had never commented on her appearance. No, that wasn't true at all, she remembered. In bed, he'd lavished her with whispered praise while he stroked and touched her breast and drove. Rain mentally put her foot down, pushed all those thoughts away, and added ice to his glass. She finished making his drink and poured a glass of red wine for herself. Then she turned around, glasses in hand. "Let's talk about Ethan," she said with an overbright smile. Chapter 58. Walking out from behind the bar, Rain nodded toward a nearby pair of small upholstered sofas facing each other across a cocktail table in the lounge area, and Liam followed her there. She put his glass and a cocktail napkin in front of one of the sofas. Then she walked around to the sofa on the opposite side and curled up on it, her legs tucked beneath her, her wineglass in hand. Across from her, Liam reached for his glass, propped his ankle on the opposite knee, and took a swallow of his drink. "What would you like to know about Ethan?" she asked as soon as he started to lower his glass. Liam already had his own conversational agenda firmly in mind, and he had no intention of letting her divert him from it. However, there was one thing he did want to ask her about Ethan before he started with his own questions. "In the bedroom tonight, he was talking to me, and then he stopped and looked at me as if he couldn't say a word, but he was trying to. Is that a normal thing he does?" Rain smiled and explained, "That's how he is. You'd be surprised to see that tomorrow he may lapse completely into baby talk and not say one word you understand. If he's extremely upset or agitated, he'll look at you in mute, heartbreaking misery. If that happens when he's with you, tell me quietly, use your words. Does that help? It often does. If you think he's having speech problems, I have a well-skilled." "Your son's verbal skills are remarkable," Rain assured him. "So much so that, right now, they're outpacing his brain's ability to simultaneously process his thoughts and words. He's also extremely smart for his age. In addition to inheriting all of your features," she finished with a smile, "he also inherited your gift for language." In response, Liam stretched his left arm across the back of the sofa and casually inquired, "If he inherited a lot from me, then whose temper did he inherit?" "Yours, of course," Rain said without thinking. "What a relief. That means I won't be afraid to put a glass in his hand." He joked half seriously. His deliberate reference to their confrontation at the banquet 2 years ago doused Rain's smile. "Please don't go there," she warned. "That's very deep water, and our history is all deep water. Because of Ethan, we can't avoid going there, so let's discuss it now, but try to tread water instead of trying to drown each other," he suggested. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Honesty." Rain stared at him in wary silence. "Shall I start?" Liam volunteered, and when she nodded slightly, he said, "All right. You've already given me the reason for not telling me we were pregnant, my behavior at the banquet. And I'm sorry for that. It was inexcusable, and there will never be a repetition." Rain looked at him over the rim of her glass and decided to test the depth of his commitment to honesty. Very politely, she said, "I'd rather have an explanation than an apology." "Fair enough," he replied. "If you had told me you got engaged to anyone but Max Everett, I would have pretended to be happy for you. But hearing about your engagement to Everett right before you stood in front of me with that smug smile on your face made it hard for me to hide my reaction and say what I said that night." What was she expecting him to say to her when she walked up to him with a smug smile that revealed all of her intentions from the start? She had played with his feelings because her pompous boyfriend and brother believed he was the reason behind their business failing, when in truth, the fools were too dense to work with their brains to achieve anything. They must have run to Rain, and Rain, being a good girlfriend and a good sister to an asshole like Jason, wanted revenge by playing with his feelings. After she'd done that, she walked up to him at that banquet looking all smug and wanting to rub everything in his face. Remembering it now still made him feel like a complete fool and a total idiot. But for the sake of his son, he was willing to sit here and hear whatever lie she would come up with as an excuse for what she did in the past. He reached for the napkin on the table, avoiding her gaze to make it easier for her to lie. "Did Max tell you I have a bad history with him because of Jason?" "Yes," she admitted. "He told me how you were one of the reasons my family's business failed and why Jason lost all the wealth." Pleased with her reply, Liam transferred his gaze to hers and rewarded her honesty with a forthright explanation about that issue. "I refuse to take the blame for your family's downfall. That was all on your brother, who was a greedy asshole. Years ago, Jason wanted to invest more and build a renowned restaurant that had a hotel and mall all together just because he wanted to come out as a top businessman. He approached me to invest in his plan, but I refused, and he pressured me to suggest to him someone who would be interested in his project. I didn't want to have anything to do with Jason, but he kept on calling and sending his assistant to me almost every day. I got fed up and finally decided to introduce him to one of my company's co-partners. Since then, I heard nothing from your brother until a night when he barged into my office while I was working late and accused me of being the reason he lost everything. Believe me or not, I had nothing to do with your family's downfall. If Rain were to choose between Jason and Liam on who was telling the truth, she'd pick Liam over her brother. But that doesn't change the fact that you lied to me, nor does it change the fact that you played me like a fool. Did you know what your actions almost caused me? You destroyed my feelings and made me hate my unborn child, Rain said, trying to sound offhanded. Shock and disbelief destroyed every other emotion in Liam's body. Outwardly relaxed and inwardly tense, he studied her, assessing her face and her tone, trying to figure out what she meant by he'd played her like a fool when she was the one who'd played him like an idiot. Quote. To be fair to you, Rain continued, unaware of the turmoil she was causing in Liam as he tried to understand what she meant, you were very clear that first night at the villa. You made it obvious you didn't want to share anything with me except a bed, not even small details like how many languages you speak. You told me straight out that you didn't want complications and that if I slept with you, it wouldn't lead to anything. But I was foolish to believe you when you said you felt the connection I felt. You took me to bed and convinced me of it. I thought I loved you, and I think you knew that, but yet you played me like a fool. Rain paused, waiting for his reaction, but he just nodded, silently accepting her words and encouraging her to continue. So she did. I couldn't find a way to forgive you for that, or the baby I was carrying, until I went to your sister's house and looked through your photo albums right from when you were born, she said, looking at him without anger. Though I knew you felt nothing for me and only used me for whatever reasons you had, I felt my resentment towards you disappear. Actually, she added with a slight smile, after looking through your albums and knowing what you've been through in life, I was willing to forgive you for everything you did. Desperate for her to continue so he could get his point straight, Liam drew a steadying breath and said quietly, You have a very forgiving nature, Rain. Rain's hand shook at the soft caress she imagined in his voice when he said her name, and she stared hard at him, but his handsome face was composed, attentive, and nothing more. Actually, she said briskly, in case he'd noticed her momentary loss of concentration when he said her name, it was a picture of you, taken at the shoreline of Pineville, that made me forgive you and decide to have Ethan. That picture changed everything. How did it change everything? It was a photograph with the date and time stamped on it. It was the time we agreed to meet, and you were waiting for me. Until I saw it, I never imagined that you went to the Pineville shoreline at all that day. Liam's expression didn't change, but he had just registered everything in her logic and understood something he'd overlooked. But to confirm it, he remained calm and waited for her to say everything on her mind. Across from him, she finished the wine in her glass and stayed quiet as if she had no intention of continuing to speak. Liam lifted his brows inquiringly. Do you mind telling me what happened that day after you went back to Max? Rain swallowed the lump in her throat at the mention of that day, but then decided to talk about it as they'd agreed on nothing but honesty. He deserved to know how a 2-day mistake with him had ruined her life back then until she'd had Ethan. Though she wouldn't change that day for anything else now that she had a son like Ethan, she wasn't naive anymore to believe that Liam had loved her 2 years ago. Thus, she talked about the day like it meant nothing to her, like she wasn't affected by the fact that his little lie about not telling her that he stayed in Zen had been the reason for all this misunderstanding. She began to tell him what happened that day without looking him in the eye, and Liam interrupted with a quietly spoken instruction. Look at me. Rain automatically obeyed because she assumed he wanted her looking at him while he told her something important. Instead, he nodded and said, Go on. She hesitated for a moment and continued speaking. She told him everything, from how Max had convinced her that Liam was using her to get back at him, to the point where she called him at the hotel only to realize he'd checked out. Drawing a shaky breath, Rain said, I cried my heart out in Max's car. I cried until I was so exhausted I fell asleep. Instead of sounding remorseful or argumentative, Liam sounded vaguely puzzled. You thought you were in love with me, and yet, only a few days later, you walked up to me at a banquet wearing Everett's engagement ring, looking very smug, and offered me your cheek to kiss. And then you expect me to believe everything that happened between us on the island wasn't a play? Chapter 59. Liam's impression of her feelings that night was so wrong that Rain went from being on the verge of tears to the verge of laughter, and she stood up quickly, trying to steady her disintegrating composure. I practiced that scene for hours with Lauren because we knew you were going to be there, but smug definitely wasn't what I was supposed to convey, she said with a quick smile as she reached for his glass. Let me get you another drink, and then I'll check on dinner. He moved the glass out of her reach and rolled to his feet, trapping her between the table and his body. What were you trying to convey? He persisted so calmly and courteously that Rain assumed he didn't realize she couldn't step around him. Amusement, Rain replied, trying to sound offhanded when the collar of her green sweater was an inch from the front of his shirt, and she had to tip her head way back to meet his thoughtful gaze. I thought you'd used me as a pawn in your game, so I pretended you hadn't mattered to me any more than I'd mattered to you, she said. And your engagement to Everett, that was, what? He raised a brow in question. Max brought the ring to the island, Rain explained quickly. He put it on my finger after I cried myself to sleep. At the time, marrying Max seemed like reparation and salvation to me. My reprieve from reality lasted for a few weeks until I found out I was pregnant. Max and I hadn't been intimate after my father died, and although we got engaged the same day I slept with you, we both agreed that we needed to wait a while before we slept with each other. There was no possibility that you weren't the father. I assume he broke off the engagement as soon as you told him you were pregnant with my child? Why do I always have to do the talking while you keep asking? Rain said, feeling suddenly angry at the mention of Max. I'll start talking as soon as you answer 2 questions for me, beginning with the last one I just asked. He did not want to break the engagement. He wanted me to have an abortion, she said, still trying to defend Max as she still held on to the belief that she was at fault for making him behave the way he did the day he took his ring away from her. But you wouldn't? No, she said simply. And when you were 5 months pregnant, you saw a picture of me waiting for you at the wharf, and you thought you'd been in love with me, and yet you didn't think to contact me and tell me about your pregnancy, he pointed out. I'll go check on the dinner, she said, trying to avoid answering any of his questions. Excuse me, she added, putting her left hand against his chest in an effort to get him to step back so she could pass. To her shock, instead of stepping back, he captured both her upper arms and held her firmly in front of him, but his tone was puzzled, not threatening. Why didn't you take a chance and come to me and tell me you were pregnant? Because I thought that even if you had cared very much for me on the island, even if you still cared for me when I told you I was pregnant, you would probably want me to get an abortion because you don't want a child. And it wasn't worth your trouble to come to me and find out for sure? Rain snapped her head back, intending to glare at him, but he was staring at her intensely, no longer looking as if he were an impartial investigator. I couldn't take the risk. The minute she said, risk, an expression of dawning horror tightened his jaw. But you took that risk with Max. Why couldn't you take it with me? Because, she said brokenly, I was afraid that if you tried hard enough, you'd be able to talk me into having an abortion, unlike Max. Liam's hands tightened, pulling her roughly against his chest in a fierce, protective embrace. Now he understood the real reason she'd not come to him that day in Pineville and why she hadn't told him she was pregnant, and he believed her. He believed everything she'd told him in the last few minutes, every heartbreaking thing, and Max and his asshole of a friend, Jason, were responsible for it all. And he was going to make sure they pretty well regret it. He laid his jaw against the top of her head, his hand drifting soothingly up and down her spine while long-suppressed memories of their time together on the island spun through his mind, each one sweeter and more poignant than the one before. A waiter shouldering a tray laden with dishes walked through the doorway, saw Rain in Liam's arms, hesitated, and then backed out of the room. Liam, she said quietly. Her voice pulled him out of his trance, and he realized her hands were flattened against his chest, gently pushing him away. Refusing to let her go yet, he touched his lips to the top of her head and whispered tenderly, "Thank you for our son." The tension went out of her body, and she nodded, her cheek rubbing against his chest, her body relaxing against his, the fingers of her right hand spreading over his heart. Liam's heart missed a beat, and his member hardened and tightened his trousers. Startled by his body's reaction, he lifted his chin and frowned at her shiny red hair, and then he remembered how easily she'd aroused him 3 years ago. His frown turned into an amused grin. Surprise turned into hope. He loosened his arms, and she stepped back out of his reach, which disappointed him until he realized that she couldn't possibly read his mind, no matter how tightly he held her. "Rain," he said solemnly, "everything Max told you at the villa was a lie." When I met him at that party where he claimed he'd mentioned you to me, he didn't tell me your name, and I didn't care who he was dating. Even if he had told me your name, why would I bother to exact revenge on him? He's an arrogant asshole with a sadistic streak he shares with his friend. At least, that's all they were to me until tonight. Liam waited, fully expecting that what he'd said would be enough to remove all her doubts. Rain shoved her hands into her back pockets, a little embarrassed by the comfort she'd felt in Liam's arms, but accepting it as inevitable under the circumstances. She was happy he was there, but she was not willing to let herself fall for him again. She was content with her life along with her son. She didn't need a man, nor a love that would ruin her once something went wrong. He could be the father of her son but not her lover. Say something, Rain, Liam said with a hopeful look, because it was finally sinking in that the delightful redhead standing in front of him now was the same woman who'd spilled a michelada down his shirt, drugged his senses, and stolen his heart. And born his child. From the very beginning, they'd been meant for each other. They still were. It was so obvious that he had simultaneous impulses to laugh and to pull her into his arms so he could start proving it to her. He wisely decided against doing either when he realized she now looked extremely unhappy with him. Nothing I say now is going to change the course of our fate, she said, twisting around and trying to pick up his glass from the table. What do you mean? Liam asked quickly, touching her arm. She hesitated and looked at him. Can I ask you a question? She said quietly, and when he nodded, she asked, after you waited for me in Pineville for hours, why didn't you try to reach me by getting my number from Mia or Neil and explain to me why you had to leave? Why did you make me misunderstand in the first place if your feelings for me were real? Liam didn't waste time explaining where the misunderstanding on his part had begun. Right after you left, I got the call to come back. I checked out of the hotel with the intention to meet you in person, kiss you goodbye, and tell you that I planned to fly back and forth every night to sleep with you until everything was cleared about Alvin's death. I also made arrangements to take you to my new home. But after I waited for you for hours, I decided to call the vet and he told me you'd picked up Eric along with a man. When I saw you at the banquet, I felt exactly like the heartbroken, jealous lover I announced to you that I wasn't. How do you think that description happened to come out of my mouth if I wasn't feeling it? Liam, it doesn't matter anymore. You don't believe me, do you? Rain smiled. Let's just say that whatever happened back then doesn't matter to me anymore now. And let's leave it at that. I have nothing against you being a father to our son, but I don't want anything more than that. Liam was dumbstruck, but not angry. Would you rather let those assholes succeed in breaking us apart without us mending anything? Rain turned her face away, unable to look at him. The picture he'd painted of what happened that day was too unbearable to face. The possibility that he'd actually planned to fly back and forth every night to sleep with her gave her a stomachache. The possibility that he'd loved her as much as she'd loved him while he waited for her that day made her cringe inside. The thought of how he would have felt at that banquet when she showed off her engagement ring to him was unendurable. Her overburdened emotions sent her reeling close to hysteria. In the last 13 hours, she'd already endured the torment of Ethan's kidnapping and the turmoil of Liam's appearance into her life. The idea that, by trusting Max, she had been the cause of all the misery and missed opportunities for Liam and her was just too much to bear. Liam watched the color drain from her cheeks, saw the tears sparkling on her lashes, and realized exactly why she was reacting that way. He tipped her chin up and said with a grin, "You're exhausted, so let's just step back from this conundrum and then move around it." What did you just say after, "you're exhausted"? I'm suggesting that you get some sleep and we deal with the other things tomorrow. In the meantime, we need to arrange for you and Ethan to stay somewhere with high-ranking security. I can't have you staying in that apartment anymore for now. Dealing with normal details was a welcome reprieve from other thoughts, and Rain rose to the occasion. There's no need for you to help us. I plan to go check on a hotel tomorrow with high security. That was not the solution Liam had in mind, so he threw in as many complications as he could think of. Do you think you can find a hotel with rooms for Dante and Ethan's nanny to stay in while you also have your room and Ethan's room? Rain remained silent, as she hadn't thought about Dante. Good, Liam said before he could catch himself. I'll make all the arrangements. All you have to do is pack what you need and be ready to leave with Dante tomorrow morning. All right, she said with a weary, grateful smile. Let me have your phone. He pulled the phone out of her pants pocket before Rain could react. He then tapped the screen and set it on her face to unlock it, all the while she watched him, stunned. She watched in astonishment as he dialed his phone number on it after unlocking it and then called himself before slipping the phone back into her pocket. "We have each other's numbers now," he grinned. "Let's go. I'll walk you to the entrance of your apartment." "What about your meal?" Rain said, her brain snapping into focus now that she understood that he was about to leave. "I don't know why the waiter is taking so long to bring the food." "Let me go see. The waiter brought it and left when he saw us. I'll get something to eat on my way to the apartment I'll be staying." "Let's go. I feel really badly about this. Your food, I mean." "Don't worry about it," Liam said as he picked up his jacket and shrugged it on before he gestured for her to lead the way. She followed him outside the restaurant, her expression anxious because he hadn't eaten when he'd said he was hungry earlier. When they reached the entrance to the back entrance of the complex apartment building, they stopped. "Will you give Ethan a goodnight kiss for me?" he asked, smiling into her eyes. She nodded unhesitatingly. "Good," he said. He stepped forward. Curving his hands around her shoulders, he pressed a light kiss to her smooth cheek. "That one's for our son." His arms slid around her waist, drawing her against his full length, and Rain braced herself for what was coming next. She could push him away if she wanted to set boundaries right now, but she would be kidding herself if she said she wasn't dying to be close to him. "This one," he whispered, holding her gaze and very slowly bending his head, "is for me." Rain had expected him to say the kiss was for her, and she smiled an instant before his lips touched hers. His warm mouth brushed over hers softly and slowly, and then possessively, and Rain yielded to the sweetness of the moment, sliding her arms around him and holding him close. He ended the kiss rather abruptly, gazing down at her with heavy-lidded eyes and a warm, thoughtful smile. "Why don't I take you upstairs and tell you a bedtime story on your bed?" Rain smiled helplessly but shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll tell you the story of my life," he joked. "I already know the story of your life. But you haven't heard it in French. It's much better in French, I promise not to bore you." He was so sexy and so endearing when he teased her that she leaned up and kissed the side of his mouth before she could stop herself. "Nice try, but no thanks." Completely satisfied with the outcome of the evening, Liam stepped away from her and said, "Go on inside." He stood there watching her as she walked into the building, but when she stopped and turned to him, he smiled and said, "I'll have a car here to pick you up in the morning." He didn't leave until he watched her disappear into the building. Rain, who had already walked inside, hurried toward a window and watched him stride toward the other side of the building where the reporters were still waiting, refusing to leave until they'd got a statement. Then she leaned weakly against the wall, filled with happiness, doubt, and disbelief on how everything had turned out. Chapter 60. The next day, Rain was in her apartment, packing more clothes for Ethan into a suitcase while holding a phone between her shoulder and cheek as she spoke to Lauren about Liam's statement to the media last night. "He knows how to dominate a place. And I liked the statement he gave," Lauren said. "I'll take a little credit for the last part," Rain chuckled, walking into the living room with the suitcase filled with additional things for Ethan and a few for herself. Lauren had called a few minutes after Liam had left the night before, but exhaustion had overcome Rain, and she fell asleep before they could talk much about Liam. However, Lauren had called again a few minutes ago, hoping to have some time to talk. But it was almost sunset, and Rain was anxious to get back to the hotel Liam had checked them into and find out how Ethan and Liam had fared together. "Rain, I'm worried about you," Lauren added quietly. "Why?" she asked. "Have you forgotten already? If you have, I haven't. I can't forget how vicious he was to you the last time you saw him at the banquet. I can't forget how broken you were until you found a photograph of him at his sister's place and were able to fantasize that he cared about you at least a little. However, right now, there are a few things that worry me more than all that. Can I tell you what they are?" Lauren had supported Rain through the awful aftermath with Liam 3 years before, and Rain knew Lauren wanted only the best for her. She also knew Lauren meant well, even though Mia had told her not to take every piece of advice Lauren gave her. To Rain, both her friends meant well but wanted different things for her. Mia wanted things to work out between her and Liam, while Lauren wanted the opposite. "All right, tell me," Rain said. "I'm worried because he put himself in the same hotel he checked you and Ethan into." Rain nodded and tucked 2 of Ethan's toys into the suitcase. This morning, Liam had arranged for a limousine to pick up Rain, Ethan, and Dante at the apartment and bring them to a luxurious high-rise hotel in uptown Zen City. The hotel manager had greeted them in the lobby and escorted them to the elevators, with Dante carrying Ethan, who was napping on his shoulder. No one can get up to the penthouse floor without first inserting this card into the elevator panel, he'd assured Rain, demonstrating how to use the card. Our staff has been given Milo Thompson's photograph, and we will be on the lookout. However, I'm sure he'd never be able to get past the security personnel that Mr. Thompson has stationed in the lobby. He ushered her off the elevator into an elegant foyer with wide hallways leading in 4 directions, each one terminating with a set of double doors bearing the name of the suite. If there's anything at all you need, the manager continued as he slid a keycard into the slot on the door of the Seaview suite, our staff is entirely at your service. We're honored that Mr. Thompson is entrusting us with your comfort and safety during this difficult transitional time. He swung open the door with a flourish and stepped aside, allowing Rain the full impact of a huge living room with a wall of glass that offered a gorgeous view of the sea and an unnerving view of Liam, standing with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, contemplating the waves far below. He turned at the sound of their arrival and strode forward, looking amused and pleased. It just occurred to me, he said, lifting his sleeping son out of Dante's arms, that you and I have spent most of our acquaintance in hotel suites. Rain rolled her eyes in exasperation. Oh please, don't say that in front of our son, she whispered. I'm sorry, Liam lied, grinning and lowering his voice very slightly. I forgot how prim you are when we're in hotels together. Biting back a smile, Rain said sternly, stop talking about hotel rooms. Another concern struck her then, dislodging that one. She narrowed her eyes at him. You aren't thinking about staying in this suite with me, are you? I've thought of doing that earlier, Liam replied meaningfully, and Rain felt her face heat. However, to put your mind at rest, I'm staying in the suite at the end of this hall. Good, Rain said, glancing quickly around just in time to see Dante, who from what she'd heard doesn't understand any language but Mandarin, grinning at his own reflection in a mirror over the sofa like he found amusement in watching himself. Not thinking too much about the bodyguard, she turned to Liam. I have to go to work, she said regretfully, glancing at her watch. What time will you be back? I'll be back by 7 in the evening, Rain replied. Eager to see Ethan and to find out how Liam and he had gotten along all day, Rain had decided to leave work early and come into the apartment to pack a few things, but now Lauren was on the phone, and she owed it to Lauren to listen to her fears, just like she'd listened to Mia's about giving her heart a second chance with Liam. I'm worried that he's going to creep into your life and then take it over before you've had time to keep him at a distance and see what kind of man he really is. I'm not going to let that happen, Rain sighed. Good, because I was worried that you planned to break your date with Dr. Jacob again. Oh, my, Rain said, I forgot about that. Dr. Jacob was Lauren's colleague at the city hospital who had bumped into Rain there a few months ago and asked Lauren to introduce them. He was a nice young man, who Rain realized was shy and couldn't ask her out until he asked Lauren. How could you forget? He's been trying to take you out for a month, and you've canceled on him twice, all with good reasons, Lauren put in before Rain needed to. He's my partner, and my friend, and if you break your date with him tonight, I'm going to be really embarrassed. I work with him. I know, I understand, Rain said miserably, wishing she could cancel it, but for her friend's sake, she had to keep her promise this time. Good. I'll call him and tell him to pick you up at the hotel instead of your apartment, so you don't have to bother making the call. Look at you, Lauren said gently. You're overwhelmed at the prospect of dating a handsome doctor who thinks you are very, very beautiful. Liam Thompson. Lauren, Liam didn't spoil dating for me 3 years ago, if that's what you're getting at. I was pregnant, and then I had a little baby and a restaurant to run, but I've gone out with several men in the last year. You've had several first blind dates with men whose numbers you either delete immediately after the date or never answer their calls again, Lauren pointed out. Point taken, Rain said, shoving her hair back off her forehead, feeling thoroughly harassed. I have to leave. Call Dr. Jacob for me. She zipped the suitcase closed, looked around the room to see if she'd forgotten anything, and Lauren continued on the phone. Do you know what I'm thinking right now? Lauren said as Rain headed down to the elevator. I don't think I want to know that, Rain said with a quick smile. After a moment's thought, Lauren told her anyway, I've just realized there is a cheering possibility that, after spending an entire day taking care of Ethan, Liam will look 10 years older and be too exhausted to look at you with bloodshot eyes and fall back asleep.